I quit a job I genuinely loved, not because of the workload, not because of the pay, but because of one person. My manager needed to control everything, especially the things she didn't understand. She restricted my access to resources, tried to downgrade my performance reviews, and started building a paper trail against me. I realized if I stayed, I wouldn't leave on my own terms. So I found another job within a week, and tearfully handed in my resignation. What happened next completely flipped the power structure of the entire office. Story 1. I quit a job I otherwise adore to escape a toxic manager. Co-workers reorganized the chain of command to get me to stay. Manager ended up demoted. Context. Names and some details changed for privacy. I'm on mobile, etc. Players, me equals me, NB31, but I'm not out at work. Manager equals Lady Catherine, F60s. Managing partner equals Bennett, M50s. My partner equals Gardner, M47. Partner I'm babysitting equals Bingley, M44. My friend/co-worker, Charlotte, F30s. I am a professional attorney wrangler for a big legal firm. If you've watched Suits, I'm Donna if she was wound tighter than a child's music box. As a legal admin, I have to keep a tremendous amount of information straight. Every county in every U.S. state has their own court system, their own rules, and their own idiosyncrasies. I have 5 attorneys on my team. Despite the TV shows, it's pretty unusual for a lawyer to have a special secretary all their own unless they are very important, so 5 is a solid number. Because of the nameless death that took over the world last year, a secretary that left in January 2020 has not been replaced yet, and I've been babysitting one of the partners, Bingley, in the meantime. It's been a fun learning opportunity, as Bingley works for an entirely different region and type of law than the rest of my team. Also, he has a case where a truck exploded, was empty, which is awesome. Story. My manager, Lady Catherine, is the worst. You know the type. She plays favorites. Her best loved word is no. She must be involved in every conversation because she is just that important and necessary. We don't get along because I am a stubborn know-it-all who's been proven right a few too many times. Highlights include forbidding me from using the same resources other admins had access to, on her orders, including backup admins when my workload was too big, and then denying my overtime requests. I literally had no way to do my job some days. It's worth noting that the reason Bingley's secretary left was specifically because of Lady Catherine. In fact, 4 additional admins quit over the year explicitly because of her. Anyway, at this point, I'd been working with Bingley for almost a year. It was November 2020, and we'd settled into a pretty good routine. I'd gotten used to filing pleadings in a different state and no longer needed to double-check all my work for nuance. Because law still operates in the Stone Ages, a few U.S. states still require hard copy filing. Anything we want the judge to read has to be sent by actual mail, on actual paper, to arrive in the judge's actual hands. It's a pain. Most states let you file electronically, but whatever. Bingley mostly only has cases in one of the hard copy states. Lady Catherine, in her excessive wisdom, butted in uninvited and instructed me to include a cover letter when mailing a new filing. This confused me, as I had been filing for almost a year, and no one, including the admin who originally trained me, had mentioned a cover letter. I told her this, and she basically told me to suck it up. I called the court admin to make sure I wasn't crazy and that I hadn't ruined a year's worth of filings, and the court admin literally laughed and said to please not include a cover letter ever. So I didn't. Imagine my surprise when Lady Catherine called me, writing me up for insubordination. Even knowing the court rules, and the judge, and the court admin explicitly said to not send a damn letter, she was right, because she is always right, and I am, and I quote, a disrespectful little shit, and she was tired of me. A warning went into my employee file, pending disciplinary measures. The next day, she emailed my team telling them to reduce my score on my yearly review, as she knew I had been rated too highly for what my abilities really are. It felt to me like she was preparing to fire me by creating a history of poor performance. Well, if you're so tired of me, Madam Manager, I can leave. Within a week of looking, I found a new position. Now, here's the issue. I fucking love my team. This is the best work team I've ever been on. We take each other seriously, and we genuinely love each other. A lot of times admins get pushed around because we don't have fancy degrees, but not here. Calling in to quit, I cried. I cried a lot. I cried to the point that one of the partners, Bennett, asked if I wanted a counteroffer. I said no, because that wouldn't solve anything. He asked what I meant. I told him. I told him about the write-up. I told him how she was trying to falsify my employee review after it had been submitted. I told him the reason 5 admins had left. I told him about how I wasn't allowed to ask for help. At this point, I had given myself hiccups from weeping, and one of the partners on my team, Gardner, was calling him asking if he and his workload were the reasons I was leaving. So Bennett let me go do other things, like day drink and create a shrine out of legal forms. I thought it was the end of it, until a friend in another office, Charlotte, called me asking WTF I was doing. She doesn't have time to train someone into being the new me, and I was the only admin she actually trusts in my office. So, why was I leaving her all alone? I told her, and she told Gardner, and together they plotted. First, Charlotte is the manager in her office, so she is on equal footing with Lady Catherine. They also report to the same person. Charlotte called the district manager and told him that Lady Catherine was driving admins away and that the most recent quitter, me, was the only person who knows how to do a lot of the work on my teams, and my loss was a serious blow. Apparently this is true, which is both heartwarming and terrifying. Meanwhile, Gardner called up a fellow partner and told her that his world would collapse in on itself if I left. He would go to the nearest bridge and jump off it, which would be pretty impressive in a landlocked state. They had to do something. I got a call the next day from Bennett saying they had a counteroffer they were really hoping I'd take. Basically, instead of Lady Catherine, I would report directly to Gardner. Lady Catherine would be forbidden from interfering with me without first asking Gardner for his permission. This solved the issue, and I got to stay with my team, so I happily accepted. I thought the debacle was over. The debacle was not over. Unbeknownst to me, after looking at the evidence, exit interviews, emails, memos, Bennett put Lady Catherine on a performance improvement plan, and she did not get an end-of-year bonus OR raise. Turns out, I had been absolutely correct. Lady Catherine's behavior and treatment had been the explicit cause that 6 secretaries quit in less than a year. I got a call last week from Charlotte. I figured she wanted to gossip about coworkers or rant about how a shared client is a big ol' headache, but it was actually to give me a heads up. Lady Catherine had been stripped of her management duties. I no longer had any contact with her, which was great, but it also meant I didn't see that her behavior had actually doubled down on the admins, unfortunate enough to still be under her thumb. She had missed every single one of the benchmarks on her performance improvement plan. Charlotte had called me to ask my opinion on who should be the new manager, as I know everyone, and she was helping cover some things as an outside manager. Now, I know some of you are thinking, yes, become the manager and fire Lady Catherine. But I am not a sadist. I want to stay on my team and do what I do best, which is being a cheerfully annoying, respectful little shit. I told her one of the more senior admins would probably need some guidance, but would be amazing at it. No one has to deal with Lady Catherine anymore. She is now a mere paralegal and not anyone's manager at all. If she had just left me alone and not interfered where she wasn't needed, none of this would have happened. All she had to do was nothing. Story 2. Neighbor creates problems, gets it back with interest, receives it paid back with interest. Been living next to R for 20 years. First, it started with me coming home to find he had hooked up an extension cord to one of my exterior outlets and was stealing my electricity. I have a friend who is an electrician, so after the cord was unhooked before I could call the cops on him, I had my electrician pal come over and wire up that receptacle to 240 volts. I never heard any smoke or loud pops/zaps, but I hope he had been stealing my electricity to power something really, really expensive. He never plugged an extension cord into any of my outlets again. He also has frequent, weird house guests that stay for days/months. I think he lures them over with a free place to stay, and possibly drugs and alcohol. We got tired of them wandering over and knocking on our door, always interrupting us and asking for free Wi-Fi. So finally, we set up a fake open Wi-Fi network that looks like free Wi-Fi. But when you try to connect to the internet, you get redirected, and you can only view the infamous "Never Gonna Give You Up" music video, but nothing else, so you basically get rickrolled. We have a photo of the singer of that video in a frame with LED lights behind his eyes, and when someone tries to access it, his eyes light up, so we know when they're doing it. The rickroll fake Wi-Fi network seems to have stopped the weird people showing up asking to use our Wi-Fi. He also used to cut through the back part of my yard all the time, and one time his dog ran into our yard and attacked my husband while we were doing yard work. So animal control got an immediate call, and he had to fence in his backyard, which he did a horrible job on, and several times his dog has gotten loose, and I caught him waltzing through my backyard walking after it, like it was no issue. Last year, I expanded our chain link fence all the way out to the property line, so he can't cut through our yard anymore, and his dog is better contained. I had built a shed back there, and was tired of that being outside the fence anyway. I got a survey and found his bushes were encroaching on my property by quite a large area, so those got trimmed back too. I also put up privacy slats in the fence, and I don't know why that bothered him so much, but after living for years with his ugly broken-down Bronco parked on his lawn and overhanging the property line in the front, I'm totally at peace with him being ticked off by my new fence while I get the full use of my property now. I also had the new fence expansion put in with a 3 to 4 inch gap at the bottom, and our property is raised up above his. For some reason, when these houses were built, his is dug down by about 4 to 5 feet. So as his invasive junk-diseased elm tree drops all manner of leaves, dead, diseased branches and seeds in my yard, rather than quietly pick it all up like I used to, I just pull out my leaf blower and blow it all under the fence and back into his yard. I xeriscape my yard, no lawn. And some years back when I was trimming back my large perennials, the wind picked up some of the trimmings and they blew onto his lawn. I found them all thrown unceremoniously up onto my porch. I think of this and smile every time I return all the leaves, dead branches and elm seeds from his tree, and I blow them right onto his lawn. Larger branches that I used to put through our big chipper shredder, nope, tossed over the fence and on top of his lawn for him to deal with. And he never trims that tree. It is very large and mostly dead, and drops a lot of dead branches constantly. He also burns his fireplace in the summer and burns his trash rather than pay for trash service, which smells horrible and always gives me migraines. Yesterday, we stained a bunch of wood. The stains are letting off a ton of vapors in the hot weather today, and I have large outdoor fans running, and given the direction of the airflow, the vapors drift toward his side. One of the other neighbors told me he keyed her car once, and when he finally got rid of the Bronco and got himself a shiny new Subaru Impreza, but he was too cheap to pay for full coverage, and some lady broadsided him during a light change, wasn't deemed at fault for the accident, he said/she said, and several weeks later, the car came back drivable but mostly smashed, the deployed airbag still kinda hanging down on the sides. I guess life handled that one on its own. We get along with everyone else in the neighborhood, but this guy. I literally gave away 300+ pounds of fruit off of my trees last year. Peaches, plums, apricots. It was a bumper crop. We've got a snowblower and we help clear sidewalks for a lot of the folks too, and I've given away tons of perennials and loaned out garden tools. We're generally overly helpful to everyone else except R. When it comes to him, I am a petty babe, in total control of herself. He could have had amazing neighbors if he'd been even slightly considerate and been less of a nuisance, and not bullied us and stolen from us. Unfortunate for him. Edit to add, thanks for the idea of someone suggested redirecting the chipper exhaust, but that would be an absolute last resort. It's the big one from Harbor Freight Tools, and if I take the bag off, I bet that thing will shoot micro wood particles 10+ feet easily, and lots of them. I'll save that as the last, nuclear option. Thanks as well for the discussion of the trash burning as a health hazard. I close the windows, and thankfully have an arsenal of air purifiers I run on full blast when he does it. But he's breathing these fumes up close and personal. Thinking about this, I'm realizing, if I can, sometimes I joke that after all these migraines, I deserve some kind of compensation, so I can outlive him and get paid for doing so. That would be pro-revenge for all the migraines. Also, correction in first paragraph, cord wasn't unhooked by me. I would have called the cops immediately if I'd found it that way. My ex, who I originally bought the house with, unhooked it and told me about it when I got home. So away went my chance for criminal charges, unfortunately, which would have been a better and safer solution than modifying the outlet was not the safest solution, which for safety purposes I am not recommending. Story 3. Here is a story about the first job that I had a decade ago. TLDR at end. Disclaimer. Some vagueness ahead because both parties, the company and myself, displayed some awful behavior leading to some horrendous consequences for all in the name of revenge. Typos/grammar, apologies, but these errors will be fixed in due course, so bear with me. The essence is all there for now. So, I was a new but qualified recruit in a small team that was working with a very large client and stakeholder in the company. Despite my skills, it was my first real job fresh out of grad school, so I was inexperienced with office politics, contract law, power hierarchies, etc. The clients had given us an almost impossible task to prototype a complex solution to a technical problem that they had. As the only one in the team with the relevant expertise, the burden quickly fell on me to deliver alone, while the others essentially managed. The team leader and effective boss promised me at the beginning that I would get a bonus worth roughly 30% of the salary on which I was hired. Apparently, this bonus was a direct financial contribution from the big clients themselves, and the wheels were in motion to get this extra cash. Great, but not really, because it was not in writing. Over the next 2 years, however, no such bonus compensation transpired. I would periodically, and half-heartedly, ask about this bonus during in-person meetings, and I was verbally reassured it was on its way. In hindsight, I would have been more assertive and perhaps sent an email, but again, I was a newbie and unwilling to bite the hand that feeds, so to speak. After these 2 years, the company began to expand business with the client as a direct result of the work that I was on the impossible project. At some point, the clients even present all that hard work of mine at some international conferences, of course claiming it their intellectual prop and proprietary solution. Although the project ownership rightfully and lawfully belonged to them, the lack of acknowledgement left a bitter taste in my mouth. And worse was that money flowing around, and both companies were profiting from 2 years of painstaking effort, but there was no bonus in sight. So my work contract was also nearing its end in the 3rd year. Obviously, the company wanted to retain me to continue on this project. I was the only one who knew the ins and outs of it. It would be a joint employment between the company and client, as I would be tasked with transitioning the project from the company to the client, which would require several more years to do so. I also went through half a year of specialist training with the clients. Only I could do this job for the foreseeable future. For this, I was offered a decent increase in my salary, but that missing bonus was ruining my trust. At a contract negotiation meeting, I asked about it one last time. The team leader and boss said that they had no recollection of such an agreement/offer and that I should have got it in writing. Fair enough. Some lessons are learnt the hard way. But the worst realization was that the missing bonus, a measly 30% of the new higher salary for almost 3 years, was now earmarked for an intern to join me on the project. It was almost a one-to-one calculation, as the client would sponsor the intern with the funds that were intended bonus for me. It was the last week of the work contract, and Human Resources had invited me to double-check the document before I was to sign it. Of course, given all the time, money, training, and resources invested in me, continuing on this project, and my very real eagerness to do it, it was assumed that I would be here for the long haul, and the work contract was a formality. So what happened next is something that I do not recommend that anyone try at home, or work for that matter. It was a moment of impulse from a reckless youth. However, I was feeling particularly vengeful about this missing bonus. My ego had been bruised because I wrongly trusted them to follow through, but I was not clever enough to get the agreement in writing. Well, reverse card moment. There was also no written agreement on my end, so I had not yet signed contract. I carefully double-checked my emails, and there was nothing in writing where I agreed to continue on this project, or even this job. In fact, I had just been verbally enthusiastic about the project during meetings with my boss and the clients. The first new workday rolls around when I am officially no longer employed at the company or with the clients. I gave no notice and no warnings. I just abandoned them. On the previous day, I had left my company pager and phone in the office locker. I had to sacrifice a few personal possessions on the office desk. I logged out of the work email/messenger system so they could not reach me. I am not sure how they responded, because I ignored/deflected every single communication which came my way for following months. It was bliss knowing that I probably caused this company a major catastrophe for next few years at least. Of course, I could not predict the consequences that they would face from abrupt and unannounced exit, But I did not have time to care about them. I had to become selfish, and I had to dip into my savings and relocate and start afresh and anew in another city far away, which was very difficult without references considering the professional bridge that I had just burnt. Hence, the not recommending part, but eventually, my skills began to speak for themselves. The last I heard about the company was from an ex-colleague as we reconnected on an online professional network a few years ago. Apparently, the company still exists, but it is a shell of its former self as things went horribly south after I left. They lost the big client as I had anticipated. No one else had the skill set to do work. The clients are still players in the sectors, but I have the great fortune of not having had to interact with them so far. But I could not have predicted the domino effect that followed in the company. A few more large clients followed soon after, because staff had to be reshuffled to do my project, and these other clients felt neglected. Now, they are downsizing, and in the process of being swallowed by a competitor. From what I gather, the other big casualty of the revenge is my ex-boss developed some substance problem around this time to cope with this stress, triggered in part by not being able to contact me for months on end during a critical time in the company's expansion. Throw in a divorce too, because this work stress destroyed the marriage as well. I did a little bit guilty when my ex-colleague explained all this, and still do. Is it enough for me to right my wrongs and write an apology or something? Not really. But perhaps I am wrong here. I am open to suggestions. Note, this ex-boss has tried to get in touch with me a few more times some years after things went downhill, but I was too busy, so I just continued to ghosting strategy. But anyway, here is to Dumbass, Inc. I hope it was worth the measly bonus that I deserved. I was brought on as a new recruit, and I was a junior who had to lead the project from get-go. I had to work hard and learn new skills in the hours outside of work, so the fat clients and middle management to reap the rewards. Not on my vengeful watch. The reason that I am writing this is that it is somewhat cathartic. The company did some crappy things, and so did I. But this missing bonus still eats me from time to time. I could have bought a house, and I could have settled down in that old town. I wouldn't have been displaced for months, and living with my head just above the water, having to rebuild myself for a good few years following that. Abandoning the project and the job was professional suicide at the time. But my revenge was such that whatever happened, I would try to get through life without groveling back to that company. Of course, this arrogant assholery of mine, born from this hatred having not gotten that bonus, still has at least one unwritten chapter. At the current workplace, where I am also a stakeholder now, I am now proposing a new version of that old project I began a decade ago and never got a chance to see to completion. It would be nice to showcase a patent during an international conference attended by those big former clients. That would be the real bonus. So yeah, mistakes all around with at best mixed ending for all parties. R/pro revenge by R/pro suicide, I guess. But at least it is finally good to get this in writing. TLDR, company does not pay me a bonus because it was not agreed in writing. I abruptly abandoned them mid-project because my future employment with them also was not in writing. I continue to ghost them for weeks/months/years after this personal D-Day and move on in life just to spite them, and it plays a central role in causing the entire business to crumble a decade later. More stories like this on the channel. Subscribe.